What's going on, guys? Today I'm going to be going over this animation. I'm going to break down exactly how I did it. A lot of you guys were asking me how I did this, so I'm going to just go over the whole thing. Let me play it for you real quick. So there's a lot going on here. We're going to break down the whole thing from start to finish, exactly what I did, how I achieved this, and I'm going to go over my entire process for you guys. So there's a lot of things going on here in this scene. We actually have 3 different cameras capturing 3 different shots with different lenses, different focal lengths. We have some custom lighting set up here as well as an HDRI. We have volumetrics, we have textures, we have some basic animation. There's a lot going on here, so I'm going to go over all of it. I'm going to try my best to recreate this exactly from scratch. So we're going to go over the whole thing now. Let's go ahead and open up a new document here. Delete the default cube, add in a mesh plane. S12 to scale that up. Let's go ahead and add in a cube here and S5 to scale that up. And we're going to go ahead and name that volumetrics. With this cube selected, we're going to go over to our shading tab here. We're going to go and make sure we have our object selected. Make a new material, delete the principled BDSF, and add in a volume scatter node. And we're just going to go ahead and plug this right into our volume here. And then for the density, we're going to give that 0.03. And for the bottom value, we're going to give that 0.629. Heading back over to our animation tab here, I'm going to select the camera. We're going to go ahead and change that to an orthographic camera. And we're going to make the scale 9.9. Now you can make this whatever you want. This is just what I did for the project. And we're going to go ahead and pop this gizmo out here. And we're going to adjust all these values as well. We're going to change the X value for the degrees to 52. We're going to keep the second value 0. And for the Z axis, we're going to make that 45. So we have this nice angled view here. Let's go ahead and also change our location of the camera. I'm going to go ahead and type these values in. 30 for the top value. And then for Y, we're going to do negative 30. And then for Z, we're going to do 33.5. And now our camera should be sitting way above our scene, just like that. Let's go over into our render engine and change that to cycles. I'm going to make my device the GPU. Then I'm going to go to my output properties, and I'm going to make my dimensions 1920 by 1920. So we have a nice square dimension there to work with. I'm going to go ahead and hide my volumetrics cube so I can show you what we're doing next here. We're going to go ahead and add a cube in. We are now going to scale this cube on the x-axis. We want to make the x-axis 0.015. The y-axis, we want to make that 35. And then the z-axis, we're going to make that 1.3. So now we have this nice thin sheet here. Now we're going to rotate this on the x-axis by 90 degrees and on the z-axis by negative 31 degrees. We're also going to change the location as well, so it's offset to the left a little bit. Negative 8 for our x value. Y value, we're going to do negative 17, and then for the Z value, we're going to do 13. So now I'll be sitting just to the left of this plane right here. Now let's add an array modifier to this shape that we just made. We're going to go into our modifiers tab, add an array modifier, and for our count, we're going to go ahead and type in 25. And for the X factor, we're going to go ahead and make that 52, so that they're offset just a little bit, just like that. What these are for is when we shine the spotlight through, you'll see that they create a nice shadowing effect on our bottom layer. So they kind of act as a window pane. Speaking of light, let's go ahead and select our sun that comes with the default Blender file here, and we're going to go ahead and change that to a spotlight. Set the power to 50, and let's go ahead and set the radius to 1.57, which is what I used in my project. With our light still selected, let's go to our shading tab and click Use Nodes. And now you're going to get these 2 nodes right here. We want to add a node called Light Path. Now we want to connect our ray length to the color of the emission node. And for the strength, I set mine to 700. Now I'm going to go back to the animation tab and we're going to reposition our light. Now this is kind of where you get to do some creative freedom. So I want to position my light in a way that it shines through all these objects here. So I'm just going to go ahead and pop out my gizmos so I can move this around. And I just want to position this in a way that I think will make sense for the scene. So we're going to have our light shining directly through these. And I can also put these a little bit closer to our plane. Like I said, this is where you get to use some creative freedom and choose exactly how you want this scene to end up looking. Just make sure that nothing is blocking the camera, which at the moment I have something blocking it. But if you look in our viewport over here, we're looking pretty good. Just make sure that nothing is blocking the camera. Let's also take a second to unhide our volumetrics cube and just go ahead and move it up a little bit more above the plane. We can have some of it still intersecting the plane, but we want to make sure our whole scene is covered in volumetrics. If I switch to my rendered mode, you can already see the kind of effects that we're getting from these light rays. We can go ahead and go back to our lock into our camera with 0, and we can just go ahead and play around with these different elements to achieve a look that we think looks good. You can see the light streaks on the plane here. Feel free to play around with this as much as you want, but if you look at the top-down view, you'll notice these light streaks that I achieved, and this is exactly how I achieved them right here. One quick thing I forgot to mention, in order to make these volumetrics work, is we want to make sure we have our light path set up correctly. You can see our volumetrics at work right here as long as you have cycles enabled, but if you go ahead to our render properties and go down to our light paths and open up max bounces, we'll go ahead and set our volume to 10. And now you'll really notice, right when you do that, you can really see these volumetrics a lot better now. They'll be a lot more apparent. Again, I'm going to hide the volumetrics while we create our Jenga blocks. To create our blocks, we're going to start with a cube. So we're going to go ahead and add a cube, and then we're going to scale this to the exact dimensions that you would find on an actual Jenga block. And I looked these up online to make sure they were accurate. So for our X value, down here where it says dimensions, let's go ahead and give that an X value of 3. For the Y value, we're going to make that 1. And then for the Z value, we're going to make that 0.6. And this is actually the dimension that a Jenga block would be in real life. Now go ahead up to Object, Apply, Scale. I'm going to go ahead and bring this up above the plane. I'm going to hold Control and Shift as I do that. And what I'll do is just snap it just to the bottom of the plane there. And what Control does is allow you to snap, but if you do Control Shift, you're allowed to snap to smaller increments. So I'm going to go ahead and set that just at the bottom there so it's barely on the top of the floor. And then we're going to go ahead and add a bevel modifier. And for our bevel modifier, we're going to use the amount 0.06 for the first part, and then we're going to give that 10 segments. And what that's going to do is give us a nice little rounded corner. And then we're going to right click, Shade Smooth. And then I'm going to go into my Object Data Properties. I'm going to pop open the Normal tab, and I'm going to click Auto Smooth right here. And that's also going to make it even smoother, so that there's no jagged edges right there. Now we're going to texture this cube, and we're going to add logos to each side. So in order to add the textures, we're going to go to a website called polyhaven.com. I'm going to go ahead and pull that up right now for you guys. Polyhaven.com, and this website has some great resources if you love to use Blender. We're going to go into the textures area here, and the texture that I used for the floor was this wood cabinet texture. And then for the actual Jenga blocks, I used this plywood texture here. So what you'll want to do is click on the link. It'll bring you to the main part of the material, and you'll be able to download this however you want. I prefer to download the Blender file. Once you download the Blender file for each of these, I'm going to show you how to import them into Blender. Now, since I've already downloaded these into a specific folder where I organize all my materials, all you have to do now is go to File, Append, and now you just want to locate your actual file here. So I'm going to go to my materials. I'm going to go to my wood realistic material, and I believe this is the correct one. You just want to go into the Blender file, click on the material, and then you want to actually find the material folder and find the actual material itself, which is right here, and you want to click Append. And now this should be a part of your project. We're going to go ahead and apply it to our Jenga block. So we'll click on the Jenga block, go to our Materials tab, click on the drop down, and our wood cabinet should be right there. And if you zoom in, we're going to have to adjust some things here, but if you zoom in, it is now applied to our Jenga block. Now we don't want this applied to our Jenga block, we want it applied to our floor, so I'm going to go ahead and apply that to our floor, and I'm going to remove it from the Jenga block. And now we have a nice wooden floor. Now, as you can see, our grain is not going the way we want it. If you like it like this, that's totally fine, but I don't. So I'm going to go to my shading tab right here, make sure I'm in rendered view, and I'm going to go ahead and check out the nodes that come along with this material, and we can actually change the rotation. I believe it's the Z-axis. See, as I turn the Z-axis, how the actual material will change. I'm just going to go ahead and set that to 90. So now, if we go back to our animation tab, our camera view is going to show this nice material locked in at 90 degrees. That looks much better. Using the same process as I did to append the other material, I'm going to go back into my main folder. I'm going to pull up my plywood material, go into the Blender file, go into the material folder, I'm going to find my plywood, and I'm going to apply it to the Jenga block. Now, if we look and we zoom in here, we have a nice wooden texture on our Jenga block. And again, you can go in and adjust the scale and the rotation of the grain to your liking. I'm just going to leave it like this for the tutorial. Now I just want to add a logo to each side of this. So before I duplicate the Jenga block, we can actually have my logo for my Instagram on both sides, which is going to look really cool. So all I did was I made a PNG of my name in Photoshop, which is going to be kind of hard to see here, but it's a transparent PNG. And what I will do now is I'll import it into Blender as an image as planes. So I'm going to go ahead and do add image, image as planes. Now if you don't see this here, you have to go up into your preferences, you have to go to your add-ons, and you have to type in image as planes. So right here you'll see this little checkbox, import, export, image as planes. Make sure that's checked so you can have this feature. I'm going to go ahead and do add image as planes. Now I'm going to go to my desktop, select that, and as you can see it's imported right here. So if I just move it up, we'll see that there it is right there on the top of our Jenga block. Now we just need to position it to our liking. So I'm going to go ahead and start by rotating it on the x-axis by 90 degrees, just like that. And I'm going to go ahead and scale it down a bit, and I'm going to just bring it right over to the edge here. So we're just going to bring it right over to the edge, try to center it as best as we can. That looks pretty good, and I'll get it even closer to the edge so it's almost barely touching, just like that. And what I did is I gave it this textured look to make it look like it was more a part of the actual wood, and it was a used Jenga block that had kind of gone through some rough times. Now that we have this exactly where we want to go ahead and duplicate it to the other side. So what we're going to do is use a mirror modifier. So with our image as planes selected, we're going to add a mirror modifier, and we're going to go ahead and flip it on the y-axis. And if we go into our material preview here, we'll notice, sorry, just the y-axis, we'll notice that it is not doing anything yet, and that's because we have to click our mirror object and select this cube. So now it's on the other side, but wait, it's flipped. Go ahead and drop this data thing down and just click on mirror U, and that should fix everything. So now we have our cube selected as the mirror object, and our image as planes are on both sides. There's only one more step. We want to make these all one piece. So with our image selected, we're going to shift click on the cube, and we're going to do Control P, and we're going to parent to the object. So now, anywhere that this cube goes, our words go too. So when we start to duplicate everything, all of our words will go together and our textures. Now, in order to duplicate these, you would think you just duplicate it, Shift D like that, and you drag it over. But it's not going to copy our logos over either. So what we want to do is we want to select the entire hierarchy. So I'm just going to shift click on all of these items, Shift D to duplicate, and now we're just going to drag that over and hold Control to snap that into place. And I'm just going to repeat that process one more time. And as you can see, we have these three lined up with each other really nicely. Now what I'm going to do next is duplicate this entire bottom layer, but to do that I'm going to first make my floor unselectable. So I'm going to drop this little toggle down here and click this arrow, which is going to allow us to make the floor unselectable. So now we can just highlight over everything, and we have all these things selected. I'm going to Shift D, duplicate, drag these up holding Shift and Control, and now they're resting right on top of the next layer. And then I'm going to pop open my rotation gizmo, and I'm just going to rotate them 90 degrees while holding Control. And what that's going to do is just snap those right into place. And now we're going to repeat the same thing. Shift D, and we're going to duplicate everything right here. We're going to drag everything up just like that, and now we have our 4 stacks right here, and I believe the final animation has 5. So I'm just going to go ahead and duplicate this top stack one more time. We're going to go ahead and select everything, Shift D, we're going to duplicate that, and we're going to rotate it by 90 degrees. Just like so. Perfect. And as you can see, we have our stack of Jenga blocks, and they're looking great. And as you can see, if you go ahead and take any one of these blocks and you move it around, the words will follow with it because everything's parented correctly. Now what we want to do is we want to make this entire stack controllable by one object. So we want to go ahead and use an empty for that. I'm going to do add empty plane axis. And as you can see, our axis is down here, but it's kind of hard to see. So I'm just going to scale it up a little bit so we can see it. And I'm going to go to my side view here so I can snap this to the center of our Jenga blocks. So I'm going to move it up, holding control, snap it to the center. I'm going to move it over, holding control, snapping it to the center yet again. And then I'm going to go over to my side view and check that out. That also looks good. It looks like our empty is pretty much perfectly centered in here. Now we want to parent everything to the empty. So select nothing, click on all of your cubes that you used for your Jenga blocks, and then you want to shift click the empty and then do Control P and press enter, and you want to select object. And now everything should be parented to our empty. So if we moved our empty around, we're going to be moving that entire block around. So all of our Jenga blocks are connected to the empty now, which is great. Now, as an artistic choice, I went ahead and removed one of these blocks so I can put it on the floor so to make it look like it was just standing there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop down one of my cube hierarchies here. I'm going to select everything, Shift D to duplicate. I'm just going to move it out of the stack, and then I'm going to go ahead and select the main cube here, right click, parent, clear parent, and keep transform. And what that'll allow us to do is now we just have a freely standing Jenga block, which I can then place on the floor wherever I'd like, just as an artistic detail that I'd like to add into my scene. So I can go ahead and give it some random rotation and make it look like it kind of just fell on the floor back here in the scene, just to give the scene a little bit more depth. Now, I noticed I set up the camera a little bit weird, so I'm actually going to adjust the positioning of it to more center our Jenga blocks here. And you guys feel free to use whatever you'd like. I like a nice centered look. That's just me. Feel free to use the rule of thirds or whatever you might like that you prefer for your scene. So I'm just going to go ahead and mess with the lighting just a little bit more here. Make it a little bit more dramatic, kind of more like what I had in the previous scene. Again, this is all trial and error. As you can see, I'm moving the light around here to get different effects. You're going to get something different depending on what you do. There's plenty of options as to what you can do, and we're going to go ahead and add an HDRI in here anyway very soon, so you don't have to worry about some of the other lighting. So we're going to add a little bit of depth of field to our camera to give this scene just a little something extra. I'm going to go ahead to my camera settings down here. I'm going to enable depth of field, and I'm going to set my distance to 52, and then I'm going to set my f-stop to 1.2. And that will just give us some nice subtle depth of field. It's a little intense right now, so you can even turn that up, or you can turn the focal distance up as well. I'm going to go ahead to my material preview, and this lets you easily and quickly see where you're focused on. So as you adjust these sliders, you can really see what is in focus and what's not. So I'm actually going to raise my f-stop up to 4 and reduce my focal length, or maybe adjust it just a little bit to 53. That looks pretty good. And again, guys, you can really adjust this to however you want. I like some nice depth of field in my scene. Personally, I think that looks pretty good, so I'm just going to stick with that for now. Now we're going to add an HDRI. We're going to use that same website for the textures that we did before. We're going to go into Assets, HDRIs, and we're going to go ahead and find the same HDRI that I'm using right now, which should be one of these outdoor scenes. And here it is right here. So this is the exact one that I'm using, so go ahead and download that, and then we're going to go ahead and import it into Blender. So now we're back in Blender here. Go to our little world icon right here, and where it says color, click on this little dot, and then you're going to select environment texture. Now we're just going to open our HDRI, and boom. So that's the same HDRI that I'm using. Now we just have a little bit more light in our scene. So my goal is to match the HDRI lighting up with the scene lighting, and the way I'm going to do that is really interesting. We're going to go to Shading tab here. We're going to click on this little drop down where it says Object, and we're going to click World. And we're just going to zoom out so we can see our nodes here. And then we're going to go ahead and add a texture coordinate node. Oops, coordinate. We're going to go ahead and also add a mapping node. And we're going to go ahead and plug the vector of the mapping node into the vector of the HDRI, and then generated into the vector of the mapping. And now if we go to our rendered view up top, what we can actually do is change the actual angle and rotation of the HDRI. And we want to actually change the Z value here so that we can actually rotate our HDRI to properly suit our lighting setup. I'm going to go ahead and press 0 to snap back into camera view, and I'm just going to rotate my HDRI until I find something I really, really like. I like that. That looks pretty good. I like how those shadows are being cast. So that's negative 281 degrees for me. You guys can go with whatever you like. And again, the more that you adjust this, you can really fine tune the scene to exactly how you like. Now, one quick thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to apply that same wooden material that's on the floor to our blinds here, or our window pane, whatever you want to call those. So I'm just going to do that real quick. And what that's going to do is just kind of give us a little bit more of a warm light coming through there. And again, our volumetrics are off right now, but if we turn those on, we can see that it's very hazy. So you can also adjust your volumetric settings as well. I wanted it to look like there was a lot of dust particles in the room, so this might be the look you're going for. But if you don't like that, you can always adjust the density of the volumetrics in your shading tab here. So guys, we pretty much have our scene set up. The only other thing I'm going to do before I get into the animation is I'm just going to go ahead and duplicate this block one more time, just so I can move it over here in our scene, kind of just create a little bit more of an interesting composition. Maybe have one block right there and just have it rotated just slightly the other way, just kind of like that. And I think in my original animation I actually stacked a couple on top of each other, but this is what we're going to go with right now. So the moment you've all been waiting for, time to get into the actual animation part of things. This is where it gets really interesting, because remember guys, we have our empty here that is going to control all of our blocks, which is fantastic because the first part of my animation features the blocks lifting up into the ground, or sorry, above the ground, and kind of floating there for a second before everything disassembles. I'm on my first frame down here in the timeline, and we're in our animation tab. So I'm going to go to my first frame, I'm going to select my empty, and I'm just going to insert a keyframe for the location and rotation. And then I'm going to go ahead and press play, probably get to around frame 30 or so, maybe 20. And I'm just going to raise this empty up, and I'm going to hold control to snap it into place. I'm just going to insert a keyframe up here. I is our shortcut for that. Location and rotation. And now if you watch, and we play this back, we have our cube stack of Jenga blocks lifting up into the air. Just like that, we already have a little bit of animation just with 2 keyframes. Now, the magic of these keyframes is that you can actually highlight them, right-click, and go to interpolation mode, and you can actually use something called back, which I really like to use a lot, and I'm going to go ahead and click that and show you what that does. Now, did anyone notice what that did right there? If I just go ahead and press play, notice how it kind of floats a little bit once it gets to the top. It doesn't just go to the top and stop. It goes past the top and back to the last keyframed position there. So if I just go ahead and I click these last keyframes and drag them out to 30, we'll have a nice smooth transition from the bottom of the floor upwards. And I think that looks really, really nice. So I'm going to probably use that same transition for the rest of our blocks when we rearrange them. This is the part that took me the longest. This is where I had to animate each individual Jenga piece and basically swap different Jenga pieces from each part of the grid here. And it just took me a while. So I'm going to go over how to do that for 2 of these pieces and show you exactly what I did, but I'm not going to go through the entire stack because that will take way too long. But you'll understand exactly how I did it after I show you this. So with our middle Jenga block selected, I'm on frame 30 here, and at this point the cube has risen into the air, and I'm ready to start swapping pieces. I'm going to go ahead and insert a location and rotation keyframe for our first block. And then I'm going to move forward to frame 45, and holding control, I'm going to move this block out this way, so it's barely resting on the edge there. I'm going to go ahead and insert another keyframe for location and rotation. And then what I'm going to do is my plan is to replace this block right here. So with our original block selected, we're going to move forward another couple of frames here. I'll go to frame 60, and holding control again, we're going to hold control and shift. We're going to line it up with that bottom block there, and then we're just going to insert another keyframe. So at this point, this is what we've keyframed thus far. The block pops out, and then it goes down. Now, I don't just want it to go down to this position. I also want it to rotate just a little bit, because this is going to give it a really interesting feel and look. So I'm just going to go ahead and rotate it 180 degrees. And then I'm going to insert that keyframe there again for location and rotation. And now what we have is the block slides out, and then it just spins down just like that. Now at this point, we want to make sure that this block is free so that our top block has somewhere to go. It has a slot to slide into. So we're going to do the exact same thing that we did to this block to the other block as well. So I'm going to go back to frame 30, select our bottom block here that's going to get replaced, insert a location and rotation keyframe, and then we're going to go to frame 45 with this block still selected, and then we're just going to pop it out with control, insert another keyframe for location and rotation, and then we're going to go ahead and check where our next keyframe position is. That's 60. So now we're going to go and select this, move it up here, control and shift, guys, remember, so that it snaps into place, and we're going to insert a keyframe here. But before we do, we're going to also rotate this one a full 180. Insert location and rotation. So now if we watch this, we have both cubes sliding out, right? Both cubes are sliding out. One goes down, the other goes up, and now all we have to do is return them to the center positions. So now I'm going to go ahead to frame 70, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hold control, drag that into the center position, insert location and rotation, and I'm going to do the same thing for this one. Now, if we play all of this back, this is the animation we get, right? So, really nice little animation here, and basically what I did is I did this for every single block, and sometimes when these blocks are in the air, when they haven't reached their final resting location, I'll actually take one of these and flip it with the other side. So now that's a whole nother thing, but basically the keyframing and the rotational aspects and location aspects are all the same. Now there's only one thing left to do. I want to add that same interpolation mode to these keyframes. So I'm going to right click, interpolation mode, and click back. And now let's go ahead and take a look at what this one looks like right now. See the difference? It kind of has that bounce to it, and it's interesting to look at. So I'm going to go ahead and apply that to this one too as well. So now if we play this entire thing back, boom. That looks really, really good. So now I'm going to pretend that I animated all of these, right? And we're going to go ahead to our export settings, and I'm going to show you guys how to export everything so that we can go ahead and apply some of our effects and some of our sounds. So you're all ready to export. You've animated all of your Jenga blocks. Obviously they're not animated here, but this is what you're going to do to export everything. What I like to do is I like to go to my output properties, check my dimensions, everything looks good, make sure you're on 100% resolution there. Frame start is 1, end is 250. Of course, if you want your animation to end sooner, that's totally fine. I'm going to choose a frame rate of 30 frames per second, although it won't matter because we're actually going to export a PNG sequence. So by default, Blender already chooses PNG sequence for you, which is great. So now all we have to do is set up a folder on the desktop, and I'm just going to call this sequence, and I'm going to go ahead and export everything here. I'm going to call this exported frames. Now for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm actually going to change my timeline frames just so that once these blocks are complete and back in their original resting locations, we can just go ahead and throw this sequence together just for tutorial purposes. So the block goes up, everything goes out, and repeat. Now I'm going to show you how to export this. Basically, you have everything set up here for your PNG. Everything looks really, really good. And literally, you're just going to go render animation. And what that's going to do is go through every single frame and render just one image out, and then we're going to recomposite the images in Blender later. So guys, one thing to keep in mind is that when you are doing this, I'm not going to actually go through and animate each of these individual pieces because that would take way too long for the tutorial. But basically you have complete creative freedom over where you place these. Just make sure at the end everything comes back together into this block. The last step after you have the Jenga blocks reassemble themselves is that you want to make sure the empty returns back down to the floor. Now instead of having to insert new keyframes, all we have to do is duplicate what we already have. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate our keyframes from 30, and I'm just going to drag them out to 50, and then I'm going to highlight the first keyframe set, duplicate that, and drag it all the way out to 60. So now if you watch, the whole thing will go up, sit there, and then it'll return back down. Now at the end, you can see that it goes a little bit below the floor. We actually don't want that. We want it to just go and settle onto the floor. So I'm going to highlight these last keyframes here, right click, go to my interpolation mode, and I'm just going to click Bezier. And now we shouldn't have that issue anymore. As you can see, it's looking very clean. And all you have to do is adjust the keyframes to your liking for the timing, and you're all good to go, and we're ready to go ahead and render this scene out and actually go and compile all the frames within the Blender video editor. One last thing that I did want to mention is that you're more than welcome to have complete creative freedom over where you put this camera. I went ahead and I duplicated my camera just a couple of times to get some more close-up shots. So for example, I wanted to get a very close-up shot of this Jenga block popping out so that you could clearly see my logo here. So feel free to duplicate the camera as needed. I'm not going to go through each individual shot because that's going to take too long, but really this is just totally up to you and your creative freedom. I know you guys can get as creative as you want. This is just the basic angle for the start of the animation, and it allowed me to show you guys the core concepts for this tutorial, but I am not going to go into each individual camera shot. If you do have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them about each camera shot. Alright, so we're ready to compile our frames. We want to click File, New, Video Editing. I'm going to go ahead and save that file. And now we're in our video editor here, and this is where we're going to import all of our image files as an image sequence. So I want to click Add Image Sequence, and then I want to actually go and locate my, my files here. Now that I've located my files, you can see these are my original source files, so these are all the frames from my original animation. You want to click the first or last frame, whichever is in your folder here, and then you want to scroll all the way to the bottom. You want to hold Shift and click the last one. Now we have them all selected, and we're going to click Add Image Strip. And what this is going to do is add everything to our timeline down here. Now we want to select our frame rate. I'm going to do 30 frames a second. And we want to adjust our resolution to 1080 by 1080, which was the original project file. One more thing we want to do is go over to video here and click reverse. And now if we go ahead and play our animation, you can see that it looks very, very nice. And before we go and export this, we want to also make sure that we have our frames cut down to exactly where they should be on the timeline. I believe I had 150. So there was 150 total frames. I'm going to play that back to check. It's looking really good, and it should loop back around perfectly. As you can see, our animation is looking really good, and we're ready to export. Now what we want to do is we want to select the folder to export to. I'm just going to use the desktop, and I'm going to call this exported file. I'm going to click accept, and then we're just going to go ahead and check to make sure everything is looking good here. We want to use the FFmpeg video format. Color management, don't worry about that. Encoding, we're going to use MPEG-4, and for the video codec, you want to make sure you have H.264 selected. Feel free to bump this up to high quality, and I'm going to go and click Render Animation. And what that's going to do is it's going to run through every single frame and compile this into a video for us. And you're probably wondering, why don't you just make the video from scratch when you go to render and export from your Blender file? The reason is that if you fail and Blender crashes, you just completely lost all of that data. Whereas when we use each individual frame, which is what we're doing here, if it fails at a certain point, you could pick back up where you left off, which is exactly why I've been doing it since I've had my first crash. So that is why we're going on each individual frame there. And this is looking really solid. So let's go ahead, pull this into Premiere, add some sound effects, add a nice overlay, and we'll go ahead and finish up this project. Alright, I am in Premiere, and I'm going to go ahead and import my file from my desktop. As you can see, here's our file. I'm going to click and drag it to the timeline, and it'll automatically adjust everything in our sequence to match those settings. Everything's looking good. I'm just going to click the down arrow and press O. So that's going to be our out. So we have our in and our out. This is just for exporting purposes. As you can see, this whole area is highlighted. Now we just want to add some sound effects and an overlay. For our overlay, I went ahead to cutestockfootage.com. I know, kind of a funny name. And I went ahead and typed in particles, and I found a few ideas for some particles we can put into our scene to just kind of elevate it to the next level. I really like this one, so I'm going to download this one and show you guys how to overlay it. As you can see, it downloaded seamlessly, very easily. I'm going to go ahead and import it from my downloads. And there it is right there. And I'm just going to click and drag it into my timeline right over top of this layer. So now, as you can see, it's in our timeline and it's playing back. And you're probably wondering, well, how can we make it transparent? Well, you want to double click on it. It'll pop open these little arrows here. You want to click on Effect Controls. And then under blend mode right here, you want to click that and you want to click screen. And what that's going to do is actually get rid of all of the black within our scene. And although it's kind of hard to tell here, if you look very closely, you can see that our particles are actually flying through the scene here. You can notice them right here. So if I play this back, we actually have some particles overlaid onto our scene to just elevate it to that next level. And of course, you can choose a completely different effect from cute stock footage if you don't like that one. There's plenty of options to choose from. There's ones with some thicker particles, thinner particles, going faster, going slower. It's totally up to you what you want to use. That is just what I went with for my specific video. Now I'm going to show you what website we're going to use for the sound effects. For our sound effects, I went over to zapsplat.com. Yes, another funny name, but it is free. All you have to do is sign up for an account. They do limit you to the amount you can download per half hour, I believe it is, but you only have to wait a little bit longer. There's sometimes show ads, but you can basically go into any category, preview the sounds, download the source files, and you can go in and add them to your project. I already have some downloaded, so I'm going to go ahead and import them and kind of show you guys what I did for my project. Alright guys, so we're actually in my project file that I originally used for this entire tutorial. And I'm just going to go over the actual sounds that I put in here, which sounds did what, and why they did what they did. As you can see, there's a lot of different little cuts here. There's different sound effects. There's different layers. I'm going to explain all of that. My video consisted of 3 shots. I have the original opening shot where the Jenga block stack opens up, starts to disassemble, and then I have a close-up shot of the top, just to give us that nice little effect where this one block kind of rotates towards the camera. I just thought that looked really nice. And then I had a third camera set up even closer to get this last block sliding in. So I just cut these all together in a way that I thought looked good. And then to finish off the animation, I went back to the frames where the Jenga blocks were going to sit back down onto the floor, and I cut it right at the end there. Now, you're probably also wondering, how did I get the particles to loop? The way that I got the particles to loop is that I took different clips of the same particle overlay, and I actually reversed. I started the clip here in normal speed, forward motion, and then I actually reversed it right here. So the first and the last frames where the particles are almost identical. If you look while I skip from back to the front here, they're almost identical. So that's going to give us a seamless loop. So if you ever want to do a loop with an overlay, all you want to do is actually just reverse your overlay towards the end, and you'll be able to seamlessly loop that overlay as long as you have some cuts in between. Otherwise, it'll be quite noticeable when you try to make the entire thing loop. And if that didn't make sense because it was kind of complicated to explain, let me know and I'd be more than happy to explain that a little bit more thoroughly. Anyway, these are the visual shots, and now I'm going to go over the sounds. Alright, so this part is going to be kind of interesting to explain. I'm going to try to mute each specific channel so I can go over the exact sound effects and why I used each sound effect. So as you can see here, for this first layer, I just have some sound effects that are for the blocks actually rising from the floor and then being placed back down. So I'm going to go ahead and play that for you. As you can see, I've just isolated those sounds. So at the end, I actually took that same sound effect and I just reversed it. So this is it in the beginning, and this is it at the end. So all I did was reverse that. And then in the middle, I put a few key sound effects just for those blocks sliding in and out. So this just kind of gives a little bit more specific sound to specific areas. And it just makes it a little bit more of an intimate sound effect experience. So you're actually getting what this would actually sound like. Now for this second layer, I'm going to go ahead and play it and then explain it for you. So now what this is basically some wooden blocks falling down. I believe the sound effect was wooden toy blocks falling down. And this kind of fit. For some reason, I decided to use this because I thought it was very fitting, and what it allowed me to do was get the effect that every block was moving past each other, but not have to individually place sounds to achieve that. Again, keep in mind, everything is being overlaid on top of each other, so these aren't acting individually, they're acting as a group. And I think that once everything is layered together, it sounded really nice. So now let me go over the last couple of layers here. This next layer here is just a sound effect that I chose for the block sliding in. So I'm going to play that for you. And I thought that was very fitting there. And I think it was actually a drawer closing, like some kind of wooden drawer. But again, it doesn't have to be the exact sound for what you're making. If it fits, it works. So I put it there. And I thought that sounded really nice, so I used that right here. This sound effect was one of my favorites, and I've actually used it in a past animation, so I'm going to go ahead and play it for you now. Now, what this actually is an avalanche that is kind of muffled, right? So it's an avalanche of rocks falling. But again, thought it was fitting, and it added some background effect that just sounded so nice with the overall animation. And it kind of has that slow build in the beginning to just give it this mystical feeling. So I thought it was very fitting, so I put that there as well. This one is also very simple as well. This is that sharp dinging sound. So I'm going to go ahead and play it for you now. And it kind of fades out towards the end there. I'm going to just play it one more time. And what this adds is just sort of that magical element. So this is where it's not a very practical sound, like it's not actually happening in the scene, but it adds to the project. It adds to the elements of the animation, and it makes it special. Like this thing is actually levitating up as if some spell is being cast upon it. So I really enjoyed putting this sound effect in. It really tied everything together. And now let's go to our last layer here. Now for this last layer, I duplicated the avalanche part of the audio, and I just I think I just cut it here for some reason because I think this was towards the end of this first clip. So let's go ahead and play that. I'm not sure why it cuts abruptly. This must have been the final exported file that I chose. To be honest, I'm not sure why I put this here. But I think I maybe just added to the level of sound, and it kind of solidified the animation overall. So now I'm going to unmute all these tracks, and we're going to watch it one last time with all of these sound effects. This is all of those individual sound effects that I just explained stacked on top of each other to create a unique experience that I thought sounded great. And that was the animation. So guys, I really hope you enjoyed this. Obviously, after I was done all this, I just exported this and I uploaded it to Instagram, and now I'm showing you my full process. If you guys have any questions at all, please feel free to drop them down in the comments below. I've really enjoyed making this one. This one took a long time to plan out and make. But if there's anything missing, anything you want to see, any unanswered questions, feel free to drop them down below. I'd be more than happy to answer them for you. Again, I'm just going to play this one last time, and feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video.